Hello, this is Nick Cap, and we will be looking at reproduction and development in this short, hopefully about 10-minute uh, PowerPoint presentation. Reproduction is the creation of new individuals from existing one. And this is done in a number of different ways. We have what's called asexual reproduction, is where we can create an offspring that are genetically identical to the parent, usually from budding or something else like that. And so budding is a type of asexual reproduction by the outgrowth and eventual splitting off of a new individual from the parent. An example of this is the hydra. This is an organism, very relatively small organism, green hydra here. And this is the bud that we have over here. And it will go again, we can also use fission, where the parent separates in two. An example of this would be the sea anemone. And if you're getting an idea that these are relatively simple animals, you are right. Fragmentation is the breaking apart of the body into several pieces and regeneration that we get from the whole things. Again, this does not happen in the much more larger and complex organism. What I want to get here is we talked a little bit before about chromosomes. We have human beings have 46 chromosomes. Dogs have 78 chromosomes. The buffalo have 60. Koala have 16. Yeast also have somewhere around 16. And so, again, the number of chromosomes doesn't necessarily mean how complex it is, but chromosomes are really important because they are absolutely necessary. And human beings are always going to have 46 chromosomes, and that's what they need. Again, asexual reproduction allows a population to perpetuate itself of individual members that are isolated from one another. Again, you don't need a male or female, and it allows the population to reproduce quickly. However, there are not really any genetic differences really that we see there. Now, sexual reproduction is important because we see the fusion of gametes, the sperm and the egg from the two parents. This produces a zygote, which basically produces the variation that can survive and reproduce. And again, there are some animals that can reproduce both sexually and asexually, and that's most pheromonos and individuals. And so here's looking at a different type of hydra again, and we see these fission, and we also see the egg production of eggs here. Some species are what we call hermaphrodites, where we have individuals with both male and female parts. We tend to not see true hermaphrodites in human beings, although some people do like to talk about them for some reasons. Again, fertilization plays a very important part in sexual reproduction. Again, aquatic animals, that is animals that live in the water, typically have external fertilization, and they discharge their gametes into the water. Whereas we kind of animals need to have a little bit closer association. So, again, sea stars and other organisms are broadcast reproducers. Well, these individuals, while they do lay the eggs in the water, the male is just right there in order to fertilize those sacs. Most terrestrial organisms deposit the sperm directly into the female, and so again, we don't have that kind of liquid environment because it's dry on land. Both sexes of human beings have their own individual gonads to produce gametes, and we're going to talk about humans a lot. The penis contains erectile tissue that fills with blood and becomes erect during sexual reproduction. The male gonads are encased in a sac called a scrotum, and where they produce sperm. This is required because, again, the type of cell division, the meiosis that occurs, actually that rapid cell division requires a slightly lower temperature than we have here. Again, sperm is produced in the testes. It goes up through the epididymis, goes around into the seminal vesicles, where we get some materials from the prostate, and then it goes into the urethra and then goes outside the body. Okay, and this is a frontal view of this, and you should be able to follow the sperm from where it's created to where it goes off. Again, the reproductive tract of the female, there are some structures that we have. The vagina, the birth canal, the labia majora, the labia minora, the hymen, and the clitoris, and then you could talk about that. But again, the eggs are produced in ovaries, which then go into the oviduct, which then go into the uterus and then through the vagina and then basically out the body if it does not get fertilized. If it does get fertilized, then the egg will implant into the uterus, and this is the local structure and kind of where they're at. Again, there is a stem cell that's responsible for production of sperm. This cell divides and produces what we call a primary spermatocyte. This primary spermatocyte divides again into the secondary spermatocytes, which then divides again into the developing sperm cells. So for each primary spermatocyte that is created, we get 4 individual sperm that are produced. It's a little bit reduced in the eggs in that basically one of these cells produces 1 egg and 4 polar bodies. This is so that all the nutrients and everything else get kind of trapped up in the eggs, and this occurs here. And this is showing the ovary, and this is showing the production of the egg. The female reproductive cycle is actually 2 cycles in one, what we call the ovarian cycle, which controls the growth and release of the egg, and the menstrual cycle, which prepares the uterus for possible implantation of the embryo. Hormones regulate these 2 cycles. And again, menstruation is uterine bleeding. It's caused by the breakdown of the endometrium. And this is a graphic here that we really kind of want to get to know, and we will kind of go through it. Again, this is controlled by the hypothalamus, and so basically what we see is that a peak in luteinizing hormones triggers ovulation. And so the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone are both actually produced and released by this hypothalamus into the anterior pituitary. Here's the levels of pituitary hormones in the blood, and luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone are alone, but we see right around day number 23, right before ovulation, we see a peak in follicle stimulating hormone, and then we see a peak in the luteinizing hormone. That peak in the ovarian cycle, what we see is that we see this growing follicle, and that at this point we see the ovulation, which is release of the egg. That tissue that's there becomes the corpus luteum and is responsible for production of progesterone and estrogen remaining by the follicle. As these produced, so what we kind of see here in the levels of ovarian hormones in the blood, that's hormones that are released by the ovaries and not the brain or the pituitary. And what we see is that we see a spike in estrogen before all of that stuff, and we see a relatively low levels of progesterone. When we see high levels, a surge in progesterone and estrogen levels, we see the thickening of the endometrium. If, again, the corpus luteum starts to degrade, we'll see a reduction in the amount of progesterone and estrogen, which causes that starts to cause the sloughing or the menstruation. And so basically day 0 is the start of the menstrual cycle. That will last anywhere from 5 to 7 days. We'll have another 5 to 7 days where basically we will have the triggers that will go on that will cause ovulation roughly at day 14. And then again, the corpus luteum will produce progesterone and estrogen, and if it doesn't get a signal that pregnancy has occurred, those progesterone and estrogen levels will be reduced, and we'll see menstruation happen again. So typically a 28-day cycle. The embryonic development begins with the fertilization event. We saw this a little bit. Sexual intercourse releases hundreds of millions of sperm into the vagina. Only a few hundred survive the trip to the egg, and basically only one will fertilize it. And so the shape of the human sperm is streamlined, which helps it swim through fluids in the vagina and the uterus and the oviduct. And again, you need to know what the structure is of the sperm. There's many steps that are involved in the sperm. So basically the sperm squeeze through the cells left over from the follicle. So there are these cells that are responsible for kind of helping to maintain the egg. The sperm actually has acrosomal enzymes that digest the jelly coat around there, and once the plasma membrane fuses with the eggs, the nucleus will fuse, and that will cause the production of a fertilization membrane that prevents other sperm from fertilizing it. Once this happens, we will start the developmental process. The first cell division is what we call cleavage. Blastocyst forms roughly about 6 to 7 days after fertilization. We have a fluid-filled hollow ball with roughly about 100 cells, roughly the same size as the egg. At about 9 days after conception, the embryo goes through a process of gastrulation, which is the organization and migration of cells. And at this point, we get 3 tissue layers: the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm, which are eventually going to become all parts of the body. And this is basically showing you a little bit about kind of what's going on with that cell division. Tissues and organs take shape in a developing embryo as a result of many different changes in the cells. This process can be called induction, where one group of cells influence the development of an adjacent group of cells. So the cells just aren't inherently born with kind of what they're going to be. They can kind of sense what's in their environment. Also, some of these cells, in order for it to happen, must die. And there's where we see selective killing of cells to kind of reshape the embryo. And this is used to form, let's say, the fingers in the hand. You start out with a paddle in order to get individual fingers. Those cells that are in between the individual fingers need to die off. And this is kind of roughly what we see. Pregnancy or gestation is measured as about 40 weeks from the start of the menstrual cycle in human beings. The early stages of human development begin in the oviduct with fertilization and the cleavage. That will then implant into the uterus. About 1 week after conception, the embryo becomes a blastocyst. This blastocyst implants into the uterine wall. The outer embryonic cell layer is called a trophoblast, starts to form the placenta. This placenta is responsible for providing nutrient and oxygen to the embryo from the mother. And so this is kind of basically what we're seeing. There's a picture of a beginning embryo. At 20 weeks, the fetus is still only about 7 inches long. It weighs about ½ a kilogram. It has the face of an infant, and so here we can look at that. The third trimester is a time of rapid growth. Includes very many important physical changes. At birth, we have a typical baby is about 20 centimeters long, 6 to 10 pounds. Miracle of birth. There's the structure there as well. Okay. Again, what we're seeing in our society is we're seeing individuals who are having troubles getting a pregnancy. So we can do a pregnancy where we would basically take collected sperm, we take in a collective egg, and we'd make zygote petri dishes. We would get this early embryo and we put that back into the uterus and hope for plantation. So at around age 50, human females undergo menopause and cessation, ovulation, and menstruation. Again, is this adaptive? Why not just have somebody have babies until they can't have babies no more? And so menopause might increase a woman's fitness by allowing her to invest more time and energy in her children and grandchildren instead of having kind of more children. Here is an example of a morula, just kind of a group of cells. It's these cells that we can use for cloning, and these cells for the stem cells. Again, here's a grandma with a little kid. And then this is showing you a little bit of the difference between, again, asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Again, they're both right under the right circumstances. Sexual reproduction is going to give you more genetic variability. Again, when you have to adapt to your environment, that's always a good thing. Again, asexual reproduction reduces the genetic variability, but if your system is working really good, why not go with it? And then this is looking at the difference between oogenesis and spermatogenesis. We should do that. And here's this. Here's that structure. Here's the implantation. Okay, thank you very much.